Transition, the process of change from one condition to another.
We are now at a new crossroads where change is evident once again.
What does not serve us must transform anew.
Returning to our original state of oneness and true nature of that which created who we truly are.
Confusion was the way of the past. Enlightenment is the way of the now and future. Shedding the layers.
We now bring you the transformation of the two who started as one. Our fearless planet never stands still.
Earth has been in a process of transition. Not exactly remarkable ongoing.
Welcome to Transition Radio.
Hello, and welcome to Transition Radio, live from the land of enchantment, Silver City, New Mexico. My name's Angelo Cummings, and I am your host.
And I'm Lynna Lopez, and I'll be your hostess.
Well, tonight we have an amazing show, but before we bring our guest on, we would like to go ahead and thank our sponsors.
Well, the breastformstore.com, they have pretty much everything you can imagine for your feminizing needs. And Spunk Lube has an award-winning lubricant.
Yes, and we know that we all need that every now and then, especially for those that are going through menopause, those that have had hysterectomies, the trans ladies that require dilation and all that stuff. So Spunk Lube is an amazing product for you guys to check out. And you know what? You're in luck. If you go ahead and press the code TR, you're going to receive a 10% discount. That's right, 10%. And every penny helps. So tonight we have Lisa Salazar. Okay, and Lisa is, until 2011, Lisa had been a freelance graphic designer and photographer for close to 40 years in Vancouver, BC, transitioning in 2008 at the age of 58. She says she was not a good career move for her. Her business all but dried up. After 2 years of severe unemployment, and concerned friend asked her a pivotal question. If money wasn't an object, what job description would you like to have? Well, Lisa thought for a few minutes, but surprised herself with her answer. A chaplain to the trans community. At her friends insisted that Lisa Googled chaplain training in Vancouver, which led her to Vancouver General Hospital Clinical Pastoral Education Program under the auspice of Vancouver School of Theology.
She enrolled in a 2-year master's degree in public and pastoral leadership and graduates next month. For her capstone project, she did a qualitative and quantitative study of trans-identified persons' spirituality, which revealed that trans persons are far more spiritual than the general population. Lisa hopes to use the findings of her study to help her provide fact-based and culturally sensitive spiritual support to the transgender community and their families, and to continue to work as an educator and advocate for transgender inclusion in the church and society at large.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show, Lisa Salazar. Hey, Lisa, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you. I mean, it's been almost a year since you were with us last on the radio segment.
On the radio.
Yeah. I'm sure that a lot has happened since then. A lot of exciting accomplishments that you've had. Can you tell us a little bit about what has changed since we last interviewed you?
Well, yeah, I was, as you said in the introduction, this was kind of I reached a crossroad in my life. I was unemployed, looking for what I should do with the rest of my life. And it's not that I was sitting idle. I mean, I was sending out resumes like crazy. I was applying for even entry-level jobs as a graphic designer and just couldn't get anything. And I came to the conclusion that even in a very progressive city like Vancouver, that there is still a lot of transphobia in the business community. I think a lot of business managers, anyone who's hiring, if they have an option of, all things being equal, a person that's trans that's equally qualified to someone who's not trans, chances are they're going to hire the non-trans person. And I realize that that's a reality. So being trans is definitely a liability. A lot of things play into it. If you're going to be in the creative services, you usually work in teams. You meet with clients. You work with a copywriter. You work with an art director or marketing director, and often those meetings may involve clients and companies, ad agencies, and creative groups. Teams that form are a little nervous about doing anything that could make them pariahs. Like what if the client is transphobic, or what if the client is very conservative and they don't want to lose the job, they don't want to lose the client. So if they can find another team member that's not trans, they're going to hire the non-trans person.
What do you think that is? What do you think that in this day and age, I mean, we're 2015, there's plenty of education out there, and a lot of trans individuals are more than qualified to do the job. Why do you think people in this day and age are still worrying about hiring a trans person?
Well, when you look at the numbers, one of the interesting facts that I had heard before Diane Sawyer mentioned it in the Bruce Jenner interview is that only 8% of Americans, and my guess is probably the same thing for Canadians, only 8% of North Americans actually know a trans person. So that means that 92% don't, and 92% are still basing their understanding of what a trans person is on a lot of stereotypes and a lot of negative stereotypes. And so, the numbers just aren't there. We think that, gosh, in the last 2 years, there's been so many high-profile, really excellent trans lives that have been in the media and in popular media, in pop culture. But still, the fact that only 8% of the population knows a trans person, we have a long ways to go. And so what I was saying about business, the reality is that if you're a business owner, if you're an ad agency, for example, and you're going to hire a freelance graphic designer to come in and work on a project for a client, you don't know. Most people don't have that conversation with their clients. By the way, are you transphobic or are you homophobic? They don't do that because they don't have those conversations. They don't want to risk losing a client or upsetting a client. What if they go to a boardroom, a client's boardroom, to make a pitch? This is what the new campaign is going to be, and here's the art director, here's the designer who's created all this stuff. And so, Lisa, why don't you explain what the creative rationale is? The fact that I may be talking to a very conservative board could kill the contract for the ad agency or for that creative team. That's an example. There's still that fear of repercussions. What if? And so it's unfortunate. And so I totally accept that that's the reality, and that's one of the things that contributed to my business drying up the way it did, because it went from I was invoicing, as a solo person. In 2010, I was invoicing close to $200,000 a year, and that dropped to under $20,000 3 years ago. So dropped to 10%. So that's the reality. Now I feel, as a trans person, that I have a lot of privilege. I've been able to afford electrolysis. I've been able to afford, transitioning and being able to navigate through life without worrying about negative consequences or violence. And so I, in a sense, I experience survivor guilt, because I know so many trans people for whom transition has not been that easy, especially a lot of American friends that I have who don't have the same kind of medical benefits that we do in Canada, who will never be able to afford some of the things that I've been able to afford. And so for them, if I'm experiencing in a progressive city, if I experience discrimination, silent discrimination, can you imagine? I can only imagine what it might be like for someone who lives in a more conservative city or town, for whom transition has not gone as easily, and they're in that middle ground of not looking exactly the way they would like to look or present exactly the way they would like to present. So I realize that I speak from, I'm a very privileged person, and if I'm, even with all this privilege, if I still experience that kind of discrimination, that's that's why we have to keep working. That's why I will continue to voice and come out as an advocate for for understanding in the church and in society at large.
Yeah, we need to do a lot of more work than we have been doing as a community. Instead of focusing so much on infighting and things of that nature, we really need to take our talents and our efforts and educate and go out there and, become consultants and help people understand and get a bigger picture of what being transgender is all about, that it's not some deviant behavior, that it's not some fetish, that we are hardworking individuals that unfortunately had a biological hiccup, and here we are. And I think more efforts needs to be placed on education, and we're not doing that somehow.
I personally, myself, worked with an organization that was a Southern Baptist convention, and we produced all kinds of materials for the churches and different videos and teaching series and things like that. And I know exactly what you're talking about when you're talking about a cut in salary and pay and everything, because I was a freelance video production professional. Oh,
okay, sorry, you guys had frozen.
Oh, no.
I lost your connection. So,
okay.
Could you hear me? Could you see me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
You're still going.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to add that I was a video production professional for over 25 years, and I came out as trans to Lifeway Christian Resources of the Southern Baptist Convention, and well, my $100,000 client kind of went away, and very sadly, because I did excellent work for them. I worked on countless teaching videos, series, documentaries, concerts, events, and they just wouldn't have me. And it's not like it was a surprise that I thought that I could get away with it or anything like that, but just the fact that, these people have no compassion for us as trans at all. They don't want to know. They think it's an abomination, and it's absolutely wrong in their eyes. So that brings me to question number 2 here. We've always believed that transgender individuals are angelic in a way. And you recently did this study regarding trans-identified persons' spirituality. Can you tell us what you found?
Sure. Now, I've always been curious. I know when we spoke a year ago, Mark, that you mentioned the same thing, that about the angelic aspect of being trans. And I was curious about that, what you meant by that. But I think the way I understand it, and, the one thing I've learned in the last 2 years doing becoming a theologian and immersing myself in heavy-duty theology is that language is awkward, and words we need to, when we're going to have a conversation, and theology is an ongoing conversation. There's no such thing as theology is fixed and this is the only way to interpret something. So even a word like an angel and angelic, we need to kind of understand what we mean by that. And from a purely biblical perspective, an angelic being, the derivation and the function of an angel is a messenger from God. And it's someone who's familiar with God, and basically is an angelic being is someone who actually is face to face with God. So in a sense, just technically speaking, just on that function alone, I wouldn't say that I'm angelic because I've never seen God face to face, but the messenger side of things resonates with me. And I remember reading a story about a Russian Orthodox priest I can't remember his name, but when he was a young man, he lived in Paris. And as you know, Orthodox priests, Greek and Russian Orthodox priests, they can marry. And so he was with his fiancée on the metro, and they saw this really ugly woman get on the train. And she was wearing a Salvation Army uniform, of all things. And she proceeded to come in and sat down right next to them. And they were just so grossed out. And so in Russian, speaking between themselves, they were just really tearing this woman apart. She's so ugly. Oh, she's so gross, and all this. And so when they reached the woman's stop, she stood up and walked past this young couple and said to them in perfect Russian, "I wasn't always ugly." And he says in his autobiography, that person was an angel. That person was a messenger from God and delivered a shocking message to me. And that message was, stop judging people by how they look at the inside of the person. And so he thanks that woman for what she said. And he was so, he was just cut. He and his fiancée just felt horrible. But they realized that what they had heard was instructive, it was corrective, it was what they needed to hear, and they accepted it as if it had come from God himself, as if an angel had spoken to them. I like that story. I remember when I heard that story, I thought, that reminded me of what your comment about trans people being angelic, because I thought we have a role, we have a messenger role to society. Stop looking at the outside. Look at the heart and the spirit of the person. That's what matters. And that's, I think, the message that the trans community can really offer society at large is stop looking at the outside. Don't judge a person by the packaging.
Yes, and that's exactly the point exactly of being angelic that I'm referring to. And I believe that although we don't come face to face with God per se, I believe that we do in a certain way, because God is everywhere. God is in the trees and the birds and the animals and everything that's around us. God's within us. We are part of God. So when I sleep at night, and I go into this dream stage, I believe that my spirit is in the mix with heavenly things. And I believe we all have this capability. And if we stop looking outside of us all the time, or looking for God in the heavens or outside of us, if we look within, we're going to find God within us and find that angelic connection that we all have to help each other grow as spirit beings. My humble opinion.
Okay.
Anyway, Lynna's mother is an evangelical Christian and has had a really, really hard time accepting her. Can you tell us about your experience with your parents, and what advice would you have for her?
Okay, I dreaded having to tell my parents, because when I told them, it was May of 2008, so 7 years ago, next month. And my sisters and my ex-wife had told me, don't tell your parents, respect their age. Your dad is 90, your mom is 84. Let them die in peace. This is going to destroy them. This is going to ruin them. Don't do that to them. And I would say to them, how can you ask me to do that? I don't want them to die. I don't want them to die any day soon. They might still be here for another 5 or 10 years. Are you expecting me to hold off my transition for another 5 or 10 years? You want me to wait until I'm 63 or 68? I don't think I'm going to be around. I'm going to die before they do. And so coming out to my parents took a lot of reflection and a lot of prayer. And there were several things that happened along the way that just gave me a sense of peace, that it was going to be okay with them. And the biggest one, I was thinking about my own sons, because adult sons, and I hadn't come out to them either. And I was thinking, what if the tables were turned? What if it was one of my sons struggling with whether or not they should come out to me or tell me something about their lives that they had always kept secret, that was just tearing them apart? And it was something they really felt they needed to tell me, but they weren't going to tell me because they didn't want to hurt my feelings or make me feel like I was to blame for it or whatever. And that's exactly what I was doing with my parents. So when I turned the table around, I remember just saying, oh God, I just pray that none of my sons, none of my 3 sons will ever have any hesitation to come to me as their dad and tell me that they're struggling with something or that they have a problem. I hope that they will always feel that my love for them will always be unconditional, that I will always love them. And when I had that thought about my own sons and my own relationship with them, I was able to project that to my parents. And I thought, Mom and Dad are just like I am. If the kind of parent I am, I've learned from them. They probably feel the same way. I have an obligation to tell them. So that's what turned in, that was the turning point in my life, was that I suddenly felt, no, it's an obligation. I need to tell them. And I did. And I was blown away because both my parents are very conservative, ultra devout Catholics. And when I told them, they sat there, all 3 of us were crying. It was here in this house because I moved into their home when Dad died 2 years ago. So we were sitting in the dining room and all 3 of us were crying. And after I finished and I got it all out, and then Mom cleared her throat and she said, what pains me the most is that you've lived all these years and we never knew that you were struggling. That's what pains me. That's what really causes me a lot of hurt. And then my dad said, yes, you're so strong. I can't believe that you have survived with this. And I'm so proud of you. What a strong person you are. And it was not what I expected my parents to say. I expected my dad to say, well, get out of here, you freak, you marica in Spanish. You're going to bring shame to the family. How can you do this to us? And I thought my mom was going to start beating her chest saying, oh, I've done something wrong. Forgive me, God. And that's what I expected. That was the worst case scenario, that my parents were going to kick me out and that they were going to blame themselves or blame me or call me all kinds of horrible things. But that didn't happen. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful because in the study that I did, 27% of the people said that their families had used religious arguments to reject them. And that's pretty horrible. But anyway, I'm trying to remember how to pronounce your name. Is it Lynna or?
It's Lynna.
Lynna. Okay, sorry. A little senior moment there. Okay, so what to say to your parents? Well, what I went through in even reconciling my diagnosis to my faith, because I was diagnosed in 1999 at the Vancouver Gender Clinic, and it took me another 9 years before I was able to finally begin my transition. And the reason why I could not start my transition is because I had spiritualized this whole thing, and to me, it was still man's wisdom versus what God says in the Bible, and I couldn't make the two work together. And I didn't want to park my brain on the shelf, and I didn't want to trample over my faith. It was important for me that there was some agreement before I could proceed or accept what the doctors were telling me. And that finally happened as I reflected on scripture. And it was what helped me come to terms with really looking at Matthew 19 when Jesus talks about marriage and divorce, and then he interjects the comment about eunuchs. That coupled with the story of the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8. And those two passages, we don't have time for me to get into the exposition of all that, but that's where the theology for me opened up. And I finally was able to, because it finally meshed. What the doctors had told me at the gender clinic finally made sense with those passages. And that's what gave me the permission, in a sense, to go forward and to make the changes. And because the alternative for me at that point was go out and kill myself. I was really at that point in my life, like many trans people, and we get to that breaking point, and we either do the crazy thing in transition, or we just check out. And I decided to go with life and to do the scary thing, which was to begin transition. I wish I had never had to do that. You know, I kept, even as late as 1999, when I went to the gender clinic, I went with the hope that that they had a cure, that they could give me a pill, or that there was therapy or something, that I would never have to change anything, and that this secret and this confusion would be put to sleep, and that I could just be a normal guy. And the reason for that was because I didn't want to hurt my wife, and I didn't want to hurt my sons, and I didn't want to hurt my parents, and I didn't want to hurt anybody. That to me was one of the, you know, along as well as not wanting to.
Yeah. She froze. And,
frozen.
Yeah. I think we lost her. Can't find her here. Let's see. Nope. Well, we seem to have lost her. Hopefully she's able to connect back with us. Yeah.
Do you have to disconnect her?
Or no. Let me see here. I don't know how this actually works. If she would disconnect and call back. Please, if you're listening to us, just go ahead and try to reconnect. It seems to be that she had some sort of.
Okay.
Oh, there she is.
Okay.
Okay, you're back. There you go.
Okay, so where was I where I cut out?
You were trying to find the exact point.
You were describing, you know,
what you had to
what
do.
you had to do, basically.
Yeah, because it was either do or die. That kind of thing. Then you wait until 99.
Okay.
Well, I totally understand your story, because my story echoes yours in ways. I was married for almost 17 years, had 5 children. When I told my now ex-wife that I was struggling with, you know, transgender thoughts and things, back in 2011, after having suffered through this by myself since I was a kid, you know, I mean, like everyone else, it seems, you know, it's like we all have the same narrative or something. It was really difficult, you know, it was really difficult. And all she wanted to do was to get me to stop and to look at it from a biblical perspective. She would put Post-it notes up on the bathroom mirror. She would put Post-it notes on her clothes saying that they're not for me and that they're hers. And did we lose her again?
I don't know. I just get a picture here. And are you there, Lisa? Your mic appears to be muted. There you go. Okay.
This is too bad that we're suffering so badly
it's
here.
the internet on her side.
Did you get anything of what I was?
Yeah, I heard you say about your wife leaving Post-it notes and saying this is my stuff.
Okay. Yeah, and basically wanted to go to counseling and everything, and we went to a Christian counselor that was recommended by our Baptist church, and we sat, and the counselor didn't say what she wanted the counselor to say to me, and he said, I just really, my heart goes out to you because you had nowhere to go, and you were alone, and you had no one to tell, and this was my secret. This was my thing that I was going to keep between God and me, you know, and I prayed it away. I fasted it away. I crumbled it up and put it in the fire whenever we have these like youth retreats, and, you know, giving your secret sin to God and all that. And, you know, one day back in late 2000s, I just, you know, it was like 2008, and I just felt like I had this sense of just like, I love you. It doesn't matter what you identify as. I love you as a person. I love your spirit, the person that you are, the eternal soul that I created. And that was enough for me, you know, but I still just couldn't bring myself to, I knew it was going to destroy my family. So I held on and I held on and I held on until I just got really depressed and I couldn't hold on anymore. And what happened. And now, my mother absolutely rejects me. She'll talk to me and she'll say, oh, te quiero, mijo, all that stuff, or whatever. But she will not reach out to me. I was in a very severe accident back this January, and Mark's been, helping me recover back from 3 broken neck bones and a thoracic injury. But I know that if it wasn't that I was trans, my mom would have been all over it. She would have been calling me. She would have been visiting me. But, it just is what it is,
It's a rough road. And I truly believe that religion does create or makes it a lot harder. I mean, what do you think about that, Lisa?
Well, okay, let me tell you about the study. What was really interesting is that it was the quantitative part of the study. I had 71 people, mostly Americans, 44 Americans, 17 Canadian, and a smattering of people from Australia, the UK, France, and the Philippines. And it was really fascinating to see the responses to some of the questions. What was really heartening, well, let me first say that when it came to demographic comparison of the trans community, or at least the sample that I had, to the general population, that those who identified as Christian were only 39.4%, as compared to almost 80% in the general population. So literally half the number of trans people still identify as Christian. Most of those who have, in a sense, left the Christian camp, they've gone into things like Buddhism. A few have become atheist agnostic, but not a huge number, because at the end of the day, 20% of trans people identified as atheist and agnostic compared to 17% in the general population. So it's not a huge shift. The biggest shift is to Buddhism and Eastern-like mindfulness philosophies and spirituality. But of those who remain Christian, or who still identify as Christian, only 15% listed church attendance or membership in a church as something that they are still engaged in or would like to do. So what does that mean? So that means that only 15% of the 40% of the trans people are, in a sense, church candidates, or might be church-going trans people. That's less than 1 in 7 trans persons. So we're not a huge number, So I've been asked by pastors and denominations, what advice have you got for me for us? And I tell them, well, the first thing is you don't need to worry about trans people suddenly breaking down your doors if you suddenly put a sign or a banner on your church outside saying trans people are welcome. Chances are they're not going to come. And why is that? And so the study, what the study revealed, I asked some questions about spirituality, not religion, not how religious you are, but some spiritual metrics, such as how often do you have a spiritual experience when you see something beautiful? It could be in nature or whatever. And so the range started with many times a day to never. Well, trans people have a spiritual experience appreciating the beauty of nature on a daily basis, all the time. And so these were the kind of questions. It didn't ask how often do you pray, how often do you read your Bible. Those weren't the metrics. The metrics were, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, and another measure was a sense of compassion. How often do you feel compassion towards another person? Many times a day or never? Well, trans people feel compassion all the time. How often do you feel merciful? Well, trans people feel merciful all the time. So these were the comparisons, and these questions are questions that are used by many researchers in the in healthcare when they're trying to ascertain or determine the effect of spirituality with respect to a particular medical condition, such as open heart surgery or cancer treatments. And so these questions are meant to give you a measure of a person's spirituality. How does it relate to their illness, and how they cope and how they progress? How do they improve? What is their mortality and all that? So these are some important questions to ask. So those are the questions that I compare to the general population. And that's where trans people are more spiritual than the general population, and using these metrics. So it was very heartwarming for me to recognize that. And then in having conversations with trans people in the interviews that I did, when I asked about compassion, their sense of compassion, they said, yeah, you know, having gone through what I've gone through in transition and all that, I just, I'm a different person. I'm more compassionate. I'm more merciful. I'm more forgiving. And it's just, you know, we go through transition is a transfer. It's really a transformation. You know, we go through an amazing transformation spiritually. It's a very spiritual thing that we do when we transition. We may not see it as a spiritual event, but it is. It's a series of events that are highly spiritual, because we're dealing with the transcendent. We're dealing with our understanding of us as created beings and of God and all that. And we may not use those words, but in fact, that's what happens. And so it changes our outlook on life. You know, we become more appreciative of the little things. We become more sensitive to people who are marginalized. We're way more merciful. We're way more forgiving than the general population. I mean, look at all the stuff that seeped on us, and you don't see us all, you know, flaming out. You know, we somehow managed to move on, and so that involves a lot of not only forgiving others, but it starts with being able to forgive ourselves. That was one of the other things in the study that came through, is that most trans people have a hard time forgiving themselves. There's a lot of guilt, you know, because we know that we are hurting loved ones, and we worry about that, and we beat ourselves up with that we're hurting the person we love the most, or our parents, or our children, or our brothers, or our sisters. And so it's hard, and we beat ourselves up, and we may be guilty about things that we did in our youth. You know, we might have stolen clothes, we might have done a lot of things in secret, and so there's a lot of self. We beat ourselves up for stuff like that. But the other question I asked is, have you forgiven yourself? So on one side, we have a hard time forgiving ourselves, but the majority of trans people have have come to a place where they have forgiven themselves. And there's so much research out there on self-compassion and self-forgiveness, that before we can even begin to be compassionate to other people, we have to learn how to be compassionate with ourselves. And so at some point in our transition and in our trans experience, we finally most of us come to that point where we do forgive ourselves, and we are self-compassionate, and we do the things that we need to do. But that also transforms us in how we treat other people. It makes us compassionate towards other people.
And I think that's an important evolution for trans individuals to take place, because once you eliminate that guilt and realize, like I always tell Lynna, you know, you are the biggest gift to your kids and to your ex-wife, because you have given them a reason to love unconditionally. Because it's easy to love something that's perfect. But when we challenge our loved ones with our situation, it allows them to step up like your family stepped up and showed you unconditional love. Once we learn, like you said, to forgive ourselves, to eliminate this guilt and this fear, and realize that we are a gift, that we are here to serve a purpose.
But I think it's also important to realize that
as someone who wants to be a chaplain.
Say that again?
Oh, I was going to say, so as someone like me who wants to be a chaplain, and chaplain is kind of an awkward word because a lot of people associate it with being religious, um, being a spiritual care practitioner to the trans community. Having this data is really helpful because it makes me realize that about 30% of trans people still have not forgiven themselves. So when I come alongside a trans person, we're having coffee across the table from each other at a Starbucks, or we've gone out for a walk. Those are questions I can begin to ask. Have you forgiven yourself? And help them deal with that. Have you been able to? What changes do you see? What fears do you have going forward? And that's, I think those are important conversations to have. The other thing I discovered is that trans people, it's almost like, no, thank you very much. I don't want to go to church. And we have this wall, this barrier that we have set up against organized religion, because organized religion has not been our friend. And so there's a lot of resistance. That doesn't mean that we're not spiritual. It just means that we're not interested in.
I lost you. Okay.
Okay, you were saying?
No, I was just saying that, spirituality is really the main reason.
Okay, there we are. Sorry, things had frozen. So
yeah, I don't know why it's freezing up so much today, but I was just going to add that, there's so much thrown into the mix with transitioning and, MTFs, FTMs, and why they do what they do. And for Mark and I, it's always been about spiritual reasons. I mean, we've been spiritual ever since we were kids, and, I grew up in a very spiritual environment. And, but growing up as a Christian, growing up in a legalistic society that I was brought up to be in and under, it's made me reevaluate what true spirituality is. I went to church last year in like from June and July, and had a boyfriend that would go with me and stuff like that. And there was a message about the Ethiopian eunuch, and it was basically, the message was about going outside of your confines. Peter went to Cornelius, and Paul went to the sorcerer, and Philip went to the Ethiopian eunuch. And, the eunuch was reading out of the book of Isaiah. He was a spiritual man. He was looking for God. And that's the thing that people don't understand. My wife would say, my ex-wife would say, this is something that, is demonic, and she would think that, I was, like, I don't know, channeling some other person that I wasn't or something. And the reality was that I was just really just discovering and being allowed to just discover for myself the true person that I am. And it's not that I'm male or female or whatever, it's that my spirit was allowed to come alive through this transition, and I didn't have to hide anymore.
Yeah. Thank you. The thing about spirituality is that, I mean, all humans are spiritual beings. A lot of us conflate our spirituality and we turn it into to religion. We turn it into dogma. We turn it into all kinds of rules, and that's what trans people in the study said over and over again, is that I am transitioning and being a trans person. I finally had to come to the point where I just shed all that dogma. I shed all those rules, and I realized that what was really important was how I treated other people and my relationship with the divine, with the higher power, or with the force, the spirit of the universe, whatever they wanted to call it. To me, God, and so that freed them. Having said that, that doesn't mean that now they're ready to start going to church. Trans people in the study, really came through very powerfully. Their spirituality is very private and very intimate, and and they need to protect it. So they're not about to start talking about it. Now, unfortunately, gosh, look at how in the trans community, how we beat each other up. Like I remember when Zoe Tur a few weeks ago said some comments about the trans person in the gym, and I know, Mark, that you had some comments about that. But we beat each other up. And I've heard so much vitriol, and I have read so much vitriol on the commentary after Leah committed suicide, and she left that note that her parents were religious and Christians, and they had rejected her and didn't give her the help that she wanted. And so many comments from the trans community, because these were trans boards, these were trans comments. It was just like there was so much vitriol against church and against religion and against Christianity, and rightly so. But what that also means is that if you're a trans person and for you, your faith is still important, you're not about to, when you're with other trans people, start talking about your own spirituality, because a lot of people have this negative association with spirituality and they confuse it with being Christian or being religious and all that. So we don't talk about spiritual things amongst ourselves. So in my study, one of the questions I asked the people I interviewed, the very last question was, can you tell me, can you identify any emotions or feelings that you're experiencing at this very moment? Now that we have completed the interview, going through all these questions, how do you feel right now? And it was amazing. People said with shaky voice saying, you know what? I don't talk about my spirituality, and this was really good. This was gave me a chance to really talk, and I felt safe talking to you about my spirituality, because I don't get a chance to talk to people. I'm afraid to talk to people about my spirituality. And now people were also candid. They said it was difficult because some of the questions reminded me of some very hurtful experiences that I was wounded by my church. I was wounded by my family. And so this interview caused me to relive some of those things. So there was a bittersweet experience. On one hand, it was painful, but on the other hand, it felt so good to be able to talk about my spirituality with someone. So what that tells me is, and for me, as a spiritual care practitioner coming alongside trans people, it'll be fruitless for me to say there's going to be a meeting on Thursday at 7:30. All trans people are invited. They're not going to come. But what I can do is say, hey, next Thursday, you want to get together for coffee? Let's have some coffee and let's just chat, or let's go for a walk. That's where I see that's how I see my role. It's going to be one-on-one, very intimate settings with people, helping them sort and talk about things. And whether they're Buddhist, it doesn't matter to me. Whether they might be Buddhist or Jewish or atheist or Unitarian, it doesn't matter to me, because the one thing we all have in common is that we're all spiritual beings, and that God created us, and that he gave us his image, and that we can see God in each other. And that's what I want to experience. That's what I want. Why I want to be there for trans people and for their families. And I've had opportunities to speak to parents who are struggling with their faith and their understanding of Scripture, and I've been able to talk to them and help them and look at the passage and offer them some insights, and not try to convince them and tell them you have to, everything in the Bible is wrong and all that. No, just help them. Consider this. Why did there was something really scandalous about the story of the Ethiopian eunuch? It's not just in churches, like even the sermon that you heard about, that it had to do with coming out of your comfort zone, and that Peter went to Cornelius, and that the Ethiopian eunuch that Philip went to the Ethiopian eunuch. That's partly true, and that the book of Isaiah is linked to Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's partly true, but that's leaving a lot of currency on the table. This was scandalous. It was scandalous. Can you imagine if you're Philip? How did you tell that story to the other believers when you saw them?
Translated.
What a fantastic story to tell. To say, you know what, after Stephen was stoned to death and we all scattered and left Jerusalem because we were afraid, can you believe that I went to Samaria? Me, a Jew, a devout Jew, going to Samaria? this is crazy, but I went to Samaria and God used me, and Samaritans were coming to faith in Jesus Christ. That was scandalous, because you remember the story in the Gospel of John when the disciples and Jesus traveled through Samaria, and they left Jesus at the well, and they went into town to get food, and they came back, and the whole story is, we're in enemy territory, or we're in unclean territory. And so here's Philip marching into unclean territory, talking to unclean people, and they're coming to faith, and God is at work. There are healings, there are miracles taking place. That's scandalous. And then he says, and can you believe it? An angel appeared to me and told me to go to the road between Gaza and Jerusalem and speak to this person, and it turned out to be a eunuch. Can you believe it? It was a eunuch I was talking to. We weren't supposed to talk to eunuchs before. And here I am talking to eunuch. And you know what? The eunuch came to faith. He came to faith, and he asked to be baptized. You know what? How can I say no? Isn't that scandalous that Samaritans and eunuchs, people that we would have never talked to before, they're the ones that are coming to faith, and God is working in their lives and changing their hearts. It's a scandalous story.
I think that's what Jesus did all the time. He was scandalous in his activities. He broke the Jewish law every day.
Yeah.
What do you think of all the negative outbursts from the Christian community, though, as of late? And what can we do to diffuse such a climate? I mean, they are definitely up in arms at this point about the transgender agenda. I'm reading stuff on websites and things that, even a conservative blogger made a comment about Bruce Jenner coming out and just saying basically that he's a cross-dressing man, and that,
part of the Illuminati and all this conspiracy stuff that they're creating.
Oh yeah. So you know what? We're not going to win. We're not going to win the arguments if we try to do it with by convincing them that their theology is wrong. I think what Bruce Jenner, the gift that Bruce Jenner has given the trans community, is that he's pushed the conversation. He's rekindled the conversation, because these conversations keep happening. When Laverne Fox was introduced to the world as this trans star in Orange is the New Black, and she's done an amazing job of articulating trans issues, and especially for trans people of color, trans women of color. But the only way this is it's going to be one person at a time, having conversations one-on-one. It's not going to be because we've come up with the perfect argument and the perfect ad campaign. That's not going to do it. It's going to be people actually seeing our lives, and especially those people who knew us. We need to be a little more forceful with our friends and say, if you're my ally, and if you and if you see what a difference how my life is, I am not depressed anymore, how I'm still, I'm a fulfilled individual. Tell others, who don't know trans people. Because we're only 0.3% of the population. If it's only going to be the trans voices making a difference, it's never going to happen. It's going to have to be our families. It's going to have to be our friends. And, let me just tell you one more exciting thing about the studies. I asked a series of questions at the end. I said, when you first came out and transitioned, did your family accept you? And it was simple, almost like a yes and no, but it was a range. I agree with the statement, or I don't. I agree strongly. I agree. I'm neutral. I disagree, and I disagree strongly. So it's a range of 5. So when you first came out, did your family accept you? And you would think from the responses that maybe it wasn't so bad, because the average was about, yeah, I was accepted. It was the mean in this scale was 3.8 out of 5. So it's not bad. But the next question is, and how would you rate the acceptance? So 1 being outright rejection, and 10 being unconditional love and acceptance. And then this is where you really saw the true story, because even people who felt that they were accepted by their family, when they rated the acceptance, it was 0.5 on the scale of 1 to 10. So it was lukewarm at best, the acceptance. What's interesting, though, is that only 2 people out of 71 said that they had been accepted unconditionally. Only 2 individuals could say that. So then I asked the next question is, has there been a change since you first came out? Has your family's acceptance changed? And most people said yes. Asked them again, how would you qualify their acceptance? And now 13 people said that they're unconditionally loved unconditionally by their families. So that's 6 times as many as before. It's still not a full 71 or 100%, but the responses you saw from this lukewarm response in families at least moved towards more acceptance. Now, the question I didn't ask was how much time has transpired. The important thing is that since they first came out, and some people transitioned 15 years ago in the study, and some as recent as 18 months ago. So there's quite a range there. But the message is that things do get better over time. Now, I asked the same question about friends, old friends and acquaintances. How did they accept you, and how would you rate their acceptance? And friends were all piled up right in the middle. As some were, they were neutral. It's almost like.
I think she froze again.
I can't ask her.
I can't ask her the question because she froze again.
Yeah,
it's her internet with Wi-Fi. Sometimes it gets a little spotty. Are you back?
I'm back. Okay. Anyways, the point is that over time, our friends and family do, once if they see, if they can, if we can show them that we're much happier, that we're at peace with ourselves, and all those other qualities, those transcendent qualities, that we're more compassionate, that we're more merciful, that we're not as hostile, that we're not as angry as we used to be. That begins to change people's minds, and they go, maybe there's something to this. Maybe, and even the doubters begin to change their minds. It's a slow process. It may not happen overnight. It might take months. It might take years. But I think that's the message I have for the trans community is it's not that become a doormat and let people trample over you, but I know that we want to react in anger sometimes because it does piss us off, and it is unfair and it's unjust, and we have every right to scream at the top of our voices that this isn't right. But holy cow, we shouldn't burn our bridges, like with our families. If our families can't accept us right now, well, don't say, well, fuck you, I'm out of here. Don't do that. Give them time. Pray for them if you're a Christian, and that's sort of the way I see things now. I'm way more willing to offer that kind of encouragement to people who are struggling with their families and with their friends. Is don't burn the bridges. Let them see the difference in your life. That you're much happier. That you're more fulfilled. That you're more authentic. That you're no longer living this duplicitous existence. That you are who you are, and that you are, and that you have that. That inner peace that only happens when we can finally be authentic with ourselves.
What a lot of people don't realize that it's a healing process. It's like to a lot of our friends, families, they feel we've killed the person that they've known for all their lives. So it's a grieving process for them. And once they grieve and once they process it and accept it, then the healing begins. And then when the union starts and when there's finally some sort of connection. I wanted to ask, whenever Christians choose to define the reason for discrimination against transgender individuals, they will point to Deuteronomy 22:5, which says, "A woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear women's clothing. For the Lord your God detests anyone who does this. we did further research and found out that this translated into original language, it says something quite different. What are your thoughts?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. All those passages. Holy, I remember reading those passages before when I was the fundamentalist Christian that I was, and that I needed to be in order to keep myself on the straight and narrow. And I said, here it is. I mean, the Bible says right here, I shouldn't be doing this. And then, the amazing thing is that once you start reading the Bible and you start looking at the historical context, and you don't just rely on the Christian interpretation, but you also, this is the Hebrew scriptures. You have to respect their interpretations and what they bring to the table and what they offer to our understanding. And that's when you realize that not even the Jewish rabbis are in total agreement as to what these verses mean, but they, especially in Deuteronomy, it's the sense of deceitfulness. There's an element of deceitfulness that men should not wear women's clothing because it could mean that by doing so they will stay out of battles. There's so many different interpretations, and at the end of the day, once you can accept the fact that you are trans and that this is who you are, then wearing the clothes that make you feel authentic is not considered, to me, it's not considered cross-dressing. And if we're going to, and so for me, the opposite was true. When I was presenting as a male, I was cross-dressing. That's when I was cross-dressing. Not now that I'm a female, that I'm present as female and I'm wearing women's clothing. These are the right things for me to wear. But in our society and in culture, clothing is so, it's a function of style and trends and all that kind of stuff. Look at women wearing pants and men wearing kilts, and in other cultures, men wear skirts or wraps and they look like skirts or dresses. So, the whole thing is just to use a verse like that with which to condemn a trans person is so inappropriate and so unfair. And the other passage that you pointed out to me was from 1 Corinthians. And when Paul wrote that, he's speaking to Gentiles. And in a Greco-Roman culture where ethics and the morals of the culture were so informed by a patriarchal stratification, where the male dominance was pervasive and everything was, the order of the household was the man is at the top, the woman is down here, the children and the slaves. And so when you realize the context of why Paul may have been saying these things, and the word effeminate that comes out in that passage, that it says the righteous, don't you know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of heaven, and nor will all these other people, and the effeminate are listed in there. Well, the word effeminate that is used in the original Greek is a word that was packed with, if in their time, to be, women were, the traits of femaleness were negative traits usually. They were weak, there were all these things. And so for a man to be weak and to be less than a man and to allow this male order, this patriarchal hierarchy to be violated somehow was horrible. And so it's in that context. And so that doesn't, that's why it's so dangerous and to dwell on those things. And we need to go beyond those passages and say, we need to understand them in their context. And I think Kathy Baldock, you interviewed Kathy Baldock. Have you read her book? Have you had a chance to read her book?
No, I have not, but I read some of the passage that she has sent to me, and yes.
Oh my goodness! You have to buy that book, and you need to promote that book, especially with families. With your mom, you need to get that book for her. and have her read the passage on the Bible. I think it's chapter 10 or something like that. It's amazing. She does an amazing job of just contextualizing all this historically and explaining what the words, how they were used when Paul said use those words in Deuteronomy, when those words were used, what the context was, the historical context and the setting. So I'm not a Bible scholar. In my studies, I didn't focus specifically on any of those passages. I was doing a much more general theological training for pastoral care and for spiritual care. And so, but I always defer to people like Kathy Baldock and her book when people really do want to look at those in a very systematic sort of way. And yeah.
Well, Mark and I found out that just doing some research on, that scripture back in Deuteronomy, it was basically the translation that the King James and other versions have, construed from what was originally written in Hebrew. Basically, it was put simply, never cause or force a warrior's weapon to be used by a woman or weak person, neither dress warriors, armor, a woman, or a weak person, for to Yahweh, the God of the hosts, it's the disgusting thing to do so. And Yahweh considered that those things were disgusting to put a woman or a weak person to fight in a war. And Jewish soldiers basically adopted women's dress as a camouflage during military operations. And Josephus, the historian from the 1st century, recorded this custom as part of the strategy of a band of soldiers led by John of Gischala. While they decked their hair and put on women's garments and were besmeared with ointments, and that they might appear very comely, they had paint under their eyes and limited not only the ornaments but also the busts of women. While their faces looked like the faces of women, they killed with their right hands, and when their gait was effeminate, they presently attacked men and became warriors, and drew their swords from under their finely dyed cloaks and killed everybody whom they came upon. And I mean, that is a way different interpretation of the scripture that was given, and it's historical and, liturgical, the grammatical context of the Hebrew language. And the other one in 1 Corinthians 6:9, we talk about, the word effeminate being our focus, and that's the word malakoi in Greek. And there are two words in question in this verse, and the first is malakoi, which has been pointed out literally means soft. It also has been stated that it has also the meaning of a catamite, which means a boy prostitute, a boy who has sex with men, or the passive partner in a male homosexual relationship. You want to continue?
The word,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, and Kathy Baldock touches on some of those things in detail. I mean, when the book of Deuteronomy was written, we're told that it was Moses, that he got all this when they were in the wilderness. And the fact is that a lot of these things were written by the priests at the time of the exile, and compiled, because Deuteronomy has a lot of anomalies. So, for example, when they were in the wilderness, they never imagined that they would have an earthly king, that they would have a human being as a king that would lead them, because God was going to lead them, and it was going to be that kind of they were going to be that kind of a nation, and yet in Deuteronomy there's this crazy passage where it talks about how a righteous king is supposed to rule his people. So where did that come from? Why in the wilderness would God give them the instructions as to what the righteous king, the behavior of a righteous king was, if the whole concept of them having a king never entered their mind until after they reached the promised land? They said, we want to have a king like everybody else. and then that's when Saul was named king. So the timelines are all kind of goofy. If we believe that this is Moses gave them these instructions when they were in the wilderness. So this whole thing about the important thing is that the book of Deuteronomy, it was important for the Hebrews, for the Jews, to set themselves apart from all the cultures and the nations, neighboring nations. So that's why they cut their hair differently. That's why they dressed differently. That's why their dietary, they ate differently. They grew food differently. They didn't mix crops in a field. They had all these things that were basically, we are different from everybody else around. And so it was important for them to retain and that distinction, and that they weren't going to be like all the other peoples around them. So so these laws of that's why fish with legs like lobster, that's why, and crabs, that's why you don't eat, because fish aren't supposed to have legs and they're supposed to have gills, and that's why different kinds of animals could not be eaten, because they didn't meet this prescribed order. And so anything that went against the prescribed and the natural order was considered unclean, and not supposed to be. They're not supposed to engage in any of those things, whether it's eating or behaviors or whatever. So if people are going to level Deuteronomy and use that against us, then we have every right to say, well, gosh, do you eat shellfish? And there's so many things that Christians today.
Seems like she froze. Yeah, well, it's her connection.
Yeah.
She didn't have it.
Hello?
Yeah, you're
okay. Okay. So
today.
What's that?
You said Christians today, and then we heard you cut out.
Oh yeah. So Christians today, we violate so much of the Old Testament law, and we rationalize it by saying, oh yeah, well, that was in the Old Testament, that they couldn't do that, they couldn't eat shellfish, or they couldn't do this, or they couldn't do that. But no, as Christians, we're no longer held by those laws. Well, who gives them the right to pick and choose which laws they're going to obey? And then they're going to level this one verse at us and say, you're violating this verse. And it's highly hypocritical and inconsistent.
That seems to be the way, because they cherry pick things out of the Bible and use it against us. And it's like, number one, why would God care what people wear? I mean, it's like God's not a fashion police, or what makes something a woman's clothes and what makes something a man's clothes. That's always been the battle in my head, where I don't understand. And the words they use to express how God feels, God's disgusted, or what was the line? That was it's like,
it's a detestable thing.
Yeah, well, God, have you really heard him say that, or she say that? And there's a lot of translation. Like there's one, man will not sleep with mankind as he sleeps with womankind. In Leviticus. Yeah. Well, the actual translation with that is, man will not sleep with animals in the field. I mean, that's what I've heard and what I've studied and what I've read. And King James had a gay son, if I'm correct, and he didn't like the fact that his son was gay, so he was very anti-gay. And I think that's what so much pounding about that in the Bible. My belief.
I mean, even the term effeminate. The KJV translation of Malachi into effeminate may actually be due to understanding the term in the moral softness sense, and not in any catamite, boy prostitute sense at all. This is due to the fact that the 16th and the 18th century, the term effeminate did not mean what it means to us today. So what the term was applied to a class of men who were notorious womanizers, flamboyantly heterosexual. These men pursued women as a career, often lived off of the older rich women whom they seduced. These men were so interested in seducing women that they disdained the world of men to live in the world of women. So instead of being with the men in the hunt, in the tavern, and in the smoking room, discussing politics, they spent all their time with women in the parlor, at tea, in the garden gossiping, playing cards, and talking fashion. These men were considered they were concerned greatly about fashion, but only about male fashion. The most famous of these men was Casanova. This is the kind of man that people thought of the 16th and 18th century when the word effeminate was even used. Thus, we can see how the translators of the KJV used the word effeminate. They might have seemed to them appropriate term for the idea of a morally soft and morally weak person. So if this is true, we're convinced that it's, this through the studies of the 16th and the 18th century, then the term had nothing to do with men who wanted to be women, neither TG or homosexual men, but men who had no moral fiber whatsoever. So we've demonstrated that the use of effeminate in 1 Corinthians 6:9 due to linguistic drift means the exact opposite of what it did when the verse was translated. Probably the word gigolo comes closest to the correct current interpretation. The NIV translators use male prostitute, which would seem to bear this out. They're just
holy cow! And I bet you there are a lot of pastors who would be who'd fit that definition much closer than trans people.
Absolutely.
But it's one of these things that they do this instead of doing this. It makes their sins a lot less if they're picking on us all the time.
The thing for me is that in my transition, I found out that my life means more to me now, and I feel like I can contribute more, as a human being, being me, and that's what people just didn't understand. They're like, what? So you're saying you're a better person and you're leaving your family and your kids and all that? And I'm like, it wasn't my choice to do so. They reject me, and it's, that's not my issue. My issue is doing what I'm supposed to do as a human being, and is to evolve and to grow as a person spiritually, and this is part of that journey.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
You're welcome. There's so much more to this journey, like you said, that is so much more spiritual. Mark and I, with Mark, I've discovered so many new things, and he's not outright a Christian per se, and I've had to really reconsider a lot of the things that I've been taught, about my own spirituality. But I just think that there's a lot more to it, and this journey as a transgender woman is really so much more spiritually based than anything else for me. It really is. And I think that the trans community in general kind of gets it misconstrued in their minds to thinking of what this all means or what the implications are for being trans anyway. We identify, Mark and I identify as dual gender. I definitely was born male, no doubt, but I also had the female in me. So, those are two things that were, that we were born into, and one thing that I didn't ask you about was the question with when in Genesis 1:27, where it says that God created Adam and Eve, and then in Genesis 2, it says that God created Adam and then he made Eve. There's like a inconsistency there. And I was just wondering if you thought that maybe God originally created an androgynous being that, was fully male and had the female inside as well. I tend to slide over to that side of everything because that just makes more sense to me, because I think the true divine God has both the innate spiritual sense of feminine energy and a masculine energy, and they're both useful.
Yeah. Well, and again, the great debate is that even among Jewish rabbis, and there are so many different interpretations, and one isn't better than another. I like the phrasing in the first passage where it says that God created as male and female. He didn't say, it doesn't say male or female. created this male and female to suggest that there is something of, one interpretation is that every person has both female and male qualities, masculine and feminine qualities. And that sort of resonates with me because you can see that there's so much diversity in the human race, and a very macho appearing guy could just have a really soft, be a teddy bear, just a really sweet person that we would say, well, those are very feminine qualities and traits. So I can sort of begin to understand that, if we accept that interpretation, that we in our bodies and in our beings, we house both male and female attributes. And this is not sexual. This is purely the genderness. I like the book by, what is her name? I'm terrible remembering authors' names. But anyway, there's a book. It's Omnigender.
We were given this book. Actually, I haven't read it, but it's right over there. Yeah. By a pastor.
Yeah, mine's right over here. I've read it. And it's interesting that I didn't realize that book had been written. And in the course that I took 2 summers ago on gender injustice, I reflected in one of my essays. I said, I've come to believe that God is omnigender. In the same way that we say that God is omniscient, that he's all-seeing, that he's omnipotent, that he's all-powerful, that he's all-knowing. God is all gender. He's omnigender. And I'm using the male. I catch myself realizing that I'm using the male pronoun. It's more accurate to say they. God, if I believe in the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, then it's the they. We should be able to refer to God as they. And so they're omnigender. They're not either male or female. They are all gender.
It's interesting. I had a Hebrew client that I used to train when I was had my own business, Bodies Under Construction, and I thought he was going to freak out when he found out about me. And actually, he was very understanding because he said, "Well, you're like the Elohim, with the Elohim both male and female, which is, how."
Yeah.
Yeah, so I truly believe that God is a he, she. I usually like to say her, him and her, or something like that.
You say the great I am.
The great I am, the great universe. And, as angels are androgynous, I believe God is also androgynous. But mankind has given this masculine trait to our creator. And I think our creator has a lot of nurturing. And they try to make God this angry God and wanting to hurt us, and I don't believe anything.
But it's like that God in the Old Testament is nothing like the Jesus that walked on this earth. I mean, that God, he called for the genocide of an entire population of people on the planet through the flood. I mean,
who does that?
It doesn't correlate, and then when, knocked down the walls of Jericho and then said, don't spare anybody, kill them all. I mean, I just don't know if that's the God that is the God that exists in reality, or if that's the God that is that male-driven God that is so existent in the Old Testament, and it just doesn't lend credence to what this God, for God so loved the world, God in John 3:16, it just doesn't make sense.
To me, my whole interpretation of this is the God of the Bible is not the great I am. I believe that
that's enough.
That's another show, but I'm going to give a little glimpse of. I believe that these angels that were casted down and came and actually messed with God's creation, and these are the gods that are mentioned, or the God that's mentioned in the Bible, and has nothing to do with the great I am, the universe, the old loving and purposeful God is not the one that's mentioned in the Bible.
Right, the one that, in the story of Babel, that says, let us go down and confuse their language so that they don't, make this tower so that they don't reach the heavens. And it's like, why would a God be concerned? Why would he care? If he's God, Why would it care?
And what would they say? Let us. So it's like a group. I mean, there's a lot of plural being used when in the Bible. I mean,
But
it's things
that's
that
a lot. I mean, we could be talking here for like 3 or 4 hours, you know, if, you know, about
we've done a
stuff
lot
like
of
that.
research, and we really look deep into things and try to interpret, which I think people should. What do you think?
I'm at a point right now in my relationship with God. I am so secure in my relationship with them that I, you know, all this, it's kind of like I've been able to just set all that kind of preoccupation aside. And one of the things that was, again, what the study was really an important thing for me to do, because 2 years ago, when I said to my friend, I think I'd like to be a chaplain, I thought it was the most preposterous, ridiculous thing that ever came out of my mouth. Me, a chaplain? How do you even do that? You know, and do I need to be ordained? And so it was just so crazy for me to suggest that. But the reason why it was also crazy is because since my transition, I have felt so. I've attended a couple of churches, and there's this really sweet, wonderful congregation, small, charismatic congregation here in Vancouver, Lighthouse of Hope Christian Fellowship. The people are just amazing people, LGBT. There's lots of trans people there. And from day one, when I started going there in 2010, their arms were just held wide open for me, and they were just so welcoming and all that. And they kept wanting to draw me into leadership, to be a deacon or to be in whatever. And I just never felt the peace. I never felt that's what I need to be doing. And I couldn't understand why I would feel that way. Because if there's a church that I would want to be a member of, it would be this one that I would, I should.
Yeah. Seems like she froze up again. Hopefully she'll get back.
She usually does.
Yeah, it's the connection.
It's
but
just, you know, I mean, there's just so much to be said.
I know. I mean, religion is one of those things, and it's like the Bible is cherry picked all the time. Interpretation, as we mentioned earlier, is totally out of context and very male driven. Very a lot of kings had control, and you know, control the priests and control everything. And
lots
it was like
of stuff has been lost in translation.
Yeah,
and
people were ignorant; they didn't know how to read. So they took for face value what they were being told by.
I mean, up until, you know, the Reformation of the Dark Ages, you know, when Martin Luther nailed the theses on the wall of the Catholic Church and said, "The just shall live by faith." They didn't want people to do anything.
You're back. There you
go. Okay. So I was talking about my resistance to become a member of a church or a denomination, so I feel like I'm a non-denominational Christian. And I'm reluctant to call myself a Christian because of the bad association with conservative religious bigots, the fundamentalists who keep beating us up and who are now targeting us. And so I'm kind of ashamed to label myself a Christian, and I feel uncomfortable with that label. And I prefer to call myself, I'm just a follower of Christ. And so anyway, this sense of detachment to organized religion is something that was in my experience, and it's how I felt. And so in the study, it was amazing how many trans people feel exactly the same way. It's kind of like, no, I don't need to go to church. I no longer need to get into those debates about theology. I no longer need to argue the Bible and argue my position and defend my position. I am okay with who I am. God is okay with who I am. I love God. God loves me. That's all that matters. I want to love people. I want to be compassionate. And so that's really, I think, the predominant trans type of spirituality. It's kind of like, we don't need all this argument. We don't need to be winning debates about theology. We just want to live. We just want to experience this oneness with the universe, with each other. I want to be authentic. I want you to be authentic with me. Not that you need to be trans, but let's be authentic with each other. And let's not let all these things that separate us anymore. It could be skin color, it could be nationality, it could be religion. Let's just set all those things aside. Let's just be real with each other. You know, what makes you happy? What are your fears? What are your concerns? And let's talk about those things. And chances are we're going to discover we're all the same if we really allow all this stuff to just fall away.
And that's sort of for him. You know, that's what Christ did when he came here, try to get everybody to unite and try to tell people, why do you marvel at what I do? You too can do greater things than I. The kingdom of heaven is within you. I mean, and we're taught from the time we're little that we're sinners, we're bad, we're evil, we're not worthy, your heart is wicked. And that's lies. That's true lies. I mean, there's nothing wicked about us. You know, we've been damaged, and we need to heal, and we need, like you said, we need to unite, forget about all these laws and these regulations, and just love, unconditional love, and that's what we need. Anyway, you are still promoting one of your books, so before we end the show, can you tell our viewers where they're able to get your book? And
it's right here on my shelf. Come on over.
Okay, we'll come right over.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! There it is.
There we go.
And
I do my Vanna White. Yeah, I wrote this book. I published it in 2011. I wrote it in 2010, before my surgery. It was a series of it started out as a series of emails with a friend who had a lot of questions for me about my life, and I reluctantly answered her questions. And after about 6 emails, and these were long answers, the questions she had were probing questions, and so they required long answers to fully explain things correctly. And after about 6 emails, I said to her, you know, if we keep this up, I'm going to have a book written before I know it. And she wrote back and said, well, yeah, you got to keep writing. Your life is so fascinating. It's so inspiring. And I said, yeah, but I'm never going to publish this. Are you crazy? There's so many things that I'm embarrassed about in here, you know, about what I was like as a kid, and things that I did, and the questions that I had, and all my fears and apprehensions and all that. It's I'm embarrassed by a lot of this stuff. And she said, yeah, but what if you save a life? And I said to her, that's unfair. That's unfair. Don't use that argument, because that's unfair. But what she encouraged me to do was, okay, so you'll never publish it, but keep telling your story. I think it's really good for you. And what you should do is take all the answers that you've sent me in these long emails and put them in chronological order, and just try to and fill in the gaps. Keep going. And I had to admit that something had happened in that process, in those very long emails that were probably 3-4 pages long each one. You know, there was so much stuff. Growing up, I never kept a diary or a journal for fear that it would be discovered. And if I was going to be really bearing my soul, I couldn't do it on something that someone might discover one day, and my life would be over. You guys, okay, there we go. I froze, or you froze momentarily. Anyway, something cathartic happened in those emails, and I just felt, wow, here I am committing to paper things that I was always afraid to admit to myself or to share with anyone. And so I was unburdening myself, and it just felt, it was so therapeutic to do that. So yeah, in about 3 months, I wrote my life story, and it was leading up to my surgery in Montreal. And I sort of gave myself the deadline that I need to finish this before I go for my surgery. Like I said, I never intended to publish it. So then what happened was that after my surgery, many of my friends would ask me questions like, so what was it like, the surgery? Were you afraid? Were you excited? How do you feel now? And I would, and my honest answer was, you know what? I had so much peace and tranquility going for the surgery, it was just, there was just so much, the sense of just I could be myself finally. And I said, and I think what helped me was the process I went through in the months leading up to my surgery. And oh, what was that? What did you do? And I said, well, I wrote my story down, and it was really cathartic and therapeutic to do that. And so a few friends then asked if I would let them read it. And I said, oh, are you kidding? No, this is too personal. Now, my friend that I'd been writing to had read it all, and she had, you know, she had kept saying, oh, wow, Lisa, you gotta publish this. And I kept saying, no, no, no. But a couple of friends here in Vancouver sort of insisted and kind of prodded me, and they said, can I read it? And so I shared it with them, and I made a deal with them. I said, if you find any typos, let me know, you know, because no one had proofread it or anything. And at the end of the day, about 20 people ended up reading the manuscript in various stages of editing. So every time I would send somebody a PDF, it would be the latest version after the previous edits had been done, from receiving comments from another friend, you know, who said, oh, by the way, on page whatever, this sentence is a little awkward. I think I know what you mean, but maybe you need to rewrite it. Oh, and yeah, then here's the list of the typos that I found. So this process went, you know, it got passed on and improved as it went along. And that was my editing board. It was just friends who read the story. And every single person that read the story said, you have to publish it. And so I tried to find a publisher, and it was crazy. You know, publishers, unless you have a literary agent, publishers don't want to talk to you. And then a friend suggested I consider going through Amazon, because Amazon had a self-publishing arm called createspace.com. So that's how I did it. Being a graphic designer, I laid it all out myself, designed the cover, put it all together, sent print-ready files, and so it was published for the first time in July of 2011. I don't know how many I have sold. I get a royalty check every 2 months of about $130. So it's not like I won't be able to retire from it, but it's getting out there, and it's mostly word of mouth. And what helps me appreciate the small market is the study that I did that tells me that only 1 in 7 trans persons might be interested in reading something like this, you know, and so it's not like I expect every trans person to say, oh, this is one of the books you need to read if you're a trans person. It'll appeal to people who are Christians and are struggling with reconciling their faith, or families. And that's usually the letters that I get and the emails that I get are from people who my story has helped them accept themselves as trans and as Christians, and have been able to do whatever they felt they needed to do. So, and hello?
Yeah, we just wanted to share the actual web page.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's up on the.
Hit share.
Yeah, me hit share here, and is it
transcript?
Yeah, there you go. People could go on the website where your page is actually on, and they could actually read about your story there. And if they wanted to listen to the old radio interview, they could go there, or the new TV interview is going to be right there. And if they wanted to purchase a book, all they have to go is on there, and you can check out your website, and they could contact you and ask you questions and all that good stuff. So
yeah, well, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for granting us the interview, and it's this time around.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
The most humbling thing of all this has been those letters that I've received from people. I get a little choked up just thinking about it. That I have several letters now from people who said, "You saved my life," and so I think of what my friend said when I was writing the manuscript, and when she said it could save a life. What's interesting is that my friend Jan, this person who said that, and the person who kind of poked me and kept asking me questions and prodded me to tell my story. She died 2 years ago of Lou Gehrig's disease, and I'm so grateful that I listened to her advice, and because those letters to me, I said the book has sold a million copies, and I don't care if it doesn't sell a million, more than $1 million worth of value just from those letters that I've received from people who tell me that reading my story has saved their lives, and I think that's the power of all of our stories, and it's not just my story, Mark, your story, Lynna, your story. When people can really hear our stories and when we can tell our stories, that's the only way that people's hearts are going to be changed, and we just need to be authentic and continue to be authentic and believe that there is power in that authenticity, and that our testimony speaks, how we live our lives and how we carry ourselves, and the dignity and the authenticity that we demonstrate. That's what changes hearts. It's not winning the arguments.
Exactly. And then that's one of the reasons Transition Radio and TV got started, to have people on the show to share their life stories, and people from all over the world. And that's how people learn, and like you said, open hearts and minds. We want to take the time to thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
And,
thank you so much.
It's amazing how time flies. We started at 9, it's 10:41 already. So
it's been good, though.
It's been good. That's one of the good things about having the show on Google Hangout. I don't have any restraints whatsoever on time limits, and it's a good thing to be able to allow people to share their story and just talk on, and let your voice be heard. And thank you so much for joining us, and it's been a pleasure.
And congratulations.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining yet again. It is, what's today? Today's Tuesday. Thursday, we have Charlotte. Yes, Charlotte. And Charlotte's an amazing individual. If you check out the front of the website, you'll learn all about her.
It's going to be an awesome show.
That's going to be an awesome show.
Oh, my God.
She is a powerhouse of information. She can write. She's, wow, what is she not? She's a feminist. She's from Turkey.
Right.
And very powerful individual.
What is she going to talk about? Trans, what was it? The terminology she was using.
Oh,
discriminate.
No, it's a word that is used to with immigration or immigrants, and it's just, you guys have to tune in, because this is going to be an amazing show, and she is a dynamo, and we can't wait to have her on this Thursday, 9 p.m. Mountain Time. Also, we want to say that this book right here, let me see, this camera thing is like
crazy. To the camera girl.
No, but you can't even read the thing.
Oh, I know.
Get it a little closer. There we go. Food for thought: the art of non-cooking. With
Mark has recipes in here.
Yes, and everybody that was constantly like, "Oh, show us the recipe of all these different
have pictures of Silver City."
Yeah.
I mean, there's all
kinds of stuff.
I want to show a picture.
There we go.
This is where we go hiking.
Yes. So you've got really cool pictures and great recipes, smoothies, how to make your own dressing,
salad bowls.
Yeah. There we go.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, stuff to die for.
What are we having?
We just had dinner before the show, but I'll make us a snack. Ice cream. I'll make ice cream. I make homemade ice cream with fruit and almond milk or kefir and all that good stuff. But anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. I know we probably rambled so much, and it's been a long show today, but it was a great one. Thank you, Lisa.
I'm gonna go read.
You gotta go read. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And if you can't live your truth,
then it's just not worth
living. Not at all. Well, good night, folks, and thank you.